Hello everybody, it's Anna and welcome back to my booktube channel. Wow, look at me making like two videos somewhat close to each other. As you've probably seen if you've been watching the channel for a while, I'm in a little bit of a new setup. That's because I'm sitting here at my desk with my computer because I want to talk to you a little bit about my reading tastes and how they have or haven't changed since I started BookTube, but also honestly since I started collecting like statistics on my reading, which for me has been as long as I have been using Goodreads. I've been using Goodreads since 2013, 2014, around something like that. Before that, I used to keep like a pen and paper reading log, but I don't actually have any of those left over anymore. And I was actually inspired to make this video by two things. One of those things was something I talked about in my previous video, which was the kind of empathy burnout that I feel like myself and I have heard from a lot of you have also been experiencing. That has made it really difficult to concentrate on reading and focus on getting involved in lives of fictional characters because there is so much like mental stress on all of us living through both the global events of the past 2 years and also, the fact that our personal lives haven't exactly slowed down to give us a bit of a break. So I was thinking about that. And then I also opened up my Goodreads reading challenge for the year. Usually I have my challenge set to 100 books. That's just kind of a default number. Usually I have no problem reading 100 books in a year. And I got an email from Goodreads the other day that was like, just so you know, you're 15 books behind schedule to complete your Goodreads reading challenge for the year. And I was like, well, that's kind of weird. So I logged on and I saw that I've read 68 out of 100 books this year. Now I think probably the biggest way in which my reading tastes have changed is that I just don't care, really. Like, I don't care that much about the number of books that I have or haven't read, especially this year. Especially this year, I have found myself prioritizing a lot more, not pushing myself to read things when I don't feel like reading, and making sure that I prioritize the quality of my reading experiences over the number of books I complete. I think that this has actually helped me really enjoy reading more this year and actually have like those quality experiences where I have more memories of actually reading the book and enjoying the book and kind of taking it slower, meaning that I just get more time to savor that time with those characters, or in the case of what I've mostly been reading this year, which is poetry and nonfiction, with the authors and the way that they think and how they want to tell their stories. So let's take a quick look at all of my Goodreads reading challenges that I have done to see how my tastes have changed, which means we're going to go way back to 2016. So my reading goal then was 100, and I read 125 books that year. So this was the year that I graduated college. Oh, I reread the Alana the Lioness books. Oh, that's super cool. Wow, okay. I reread those books. I was reading a lot of stuff for class, for school. A couple of memoirs. Okay, that was the year that I discovered N.K. Jemisin and started reading the Broken Earth series and all of that. Fair amount of graphic novels that we have in here. A little bit of nonfiction here and there. I think if I remember correctly, yeah, I was reading a lot of YA still at this point, just kind of as a mental break from all of the stuff that I was reading for school. I was reading a lot of classic literature, a lot of older, really like dense texts and things like that. And my sort of escapist reading was things like The Golden Compass or the Tamora Pierce books. I also started reading a lot of comics, it looks like, this last year. I started reading Rat Queens and Lumberjanes and Bitch Planet. I read Fables. I read Preacher. I read just a bunch of different books. Ooh, The Vegetarian. That one really stands out. That was a really good book. And Milk and Honey. As much maligned as that book can be for just being kind of like basic Instagram poetry, I actually enjoyed reading it. Like, I think it served a really good purpose for me to read it at the time. So that was 2016. Let's see. 2017, my goal was to read 120 books, and I read 168. Okay, yeah, 2017 was really the year that I actively started reading a lot of queer literature. This is mostly thanks to my friend Dahlia, because the two of us got really into reading queer YA books and comics and stuff. I read The Name of the Wind that year, Wise Man's Fear, those are favorites. Started reading the Tensorit books by Neon Yang, those are absolutely incredible. A couple Trash Fire books. Oh, the Tea Dragon Society came out that year. Oh, and that was when I started reading Anna Marie McElmore's books. The Bear and the Nightingale series, the one that's based off like Russian folklore. Oh, that was so good. Yeah, I started really reading a lot more like fantastic books, fantasy written for adults and stuff like that. Some cozy mysteries, the Flavia de Luce books, I was reading a fair amount of those. I read all of the Leigh Bardugo books that year, God, like everything. I remember reading Six of Crows and finishing it in bed and then like rolling over and telling my then partner, but now my husband, I was like, hey, I need to go to the library ASAP tomorrow so I can get a hold of this. Yeah, here's the queer books. We have How to Make a Wish by Ashley Herring Blake. Eliza and Her Monsters, that was so good. Openly Straight, The Love Interest. Yeah, this was really just kind of an amazing time for me in my reading. Oh, this is when I also started getting Book of the Month for the first time, which Dahlia and I did together. Actually, this is interesting because I think that this was before I started intentionally reading books specifically by Black authors and other authors of color, but especially with 2020 having my goal be to read, I think it was read 30 books by Black authors in 2020. I'm actually kind of impressed that I was not quite hitting that goal, but just sort of doing it by letting fancy be my guide. So that's kind of an interesting thing to notice. I was starting to read a lot of memoirs then. Like, it just seems that that's a genre in nonfiction that I've always really appreciated. But yeah, I read a lot of books, a lot of really memorable books in 2016 for me. 2017 rather. 2018. My goal was 100 and I read 188. So what did I read in 2018? Lots and lots of comics. I read a lot of Miss Marvel. I started reading Paper Girls, Unstoppable Wasp, just Over the Garden Wall comics. I started reading Monstrous. I started reading like the Nevernight series. This is when I also really specifically started not like branching away from YA, but starting to read more queer literature that was written like by adults and for adults. And I was still, like at the older end of the YA demographic at that time. But yeah, I Can't Date Jesus. That was a really good queer man's memoir. I read The Kiss Quotient. This was the year that I kind of started dabbling in romance, because if you've been watching the channel for a while, you'll know that I have kind of always been a little iffy about romance, and I actually went through a period where I was specifically trying to get myself to expand my horizons and read more of it as a genre. Read The Cruel Prince, read Uprooted, Spinning Silver, Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. Didn't we all read that? A lot of like queer indie comic books, it seems like I started reading there. Discovered Jen Wilde. Oh yeah, The Tiger's Daughter by Kay Arsenault Rivera. That was a huge one on BookTube for a while, as was/is Circe. I started a reread of The Wizard of Earthsea. I started rereading the Kell books by Tamora Pierce. Read Educated by Tara Westover. Read The Song of Achilles that year. Okay, so like this was also kind of a big BookTube year. Like I think I started BookTube in 2017. 2018 was a year that I was definitely like keeping up with the trends more than I am now of what's popular on BookTube. Yeah, a lot of just rereads of favorites here and a lot of queer YA, a lot of comics. Read the Scythe books by Neil Shusterman, a bunch of Steven Universe. Oh yeah, Dirty River. Dirty River was really good. So like, I guess there is also kind of the beginning of like the very beginning of me intentionally seeking out disabled authors and disability representation in books, because I believe 2018 was actually the year that Erin and I started the Disability Readathon, so it's kind of neat to see that. In 2019, my goal was to read 180 books, and I read 221. What was in the water in 2019? What happened there? Yeah, this was the year that I like specifically decided starting to read romance, because we've got romance book club, we've got all of the different Hanukkah anthologies that I read. Ooh, this was a good one. This Will Be My Undoing by Morgan Jerkins. That was an essay collection about her experiences being a Black woman in America. Ooh, Tinderbox. That was a really good queer history book. Oh man, Becky Chambers. This was the year that I discovered Becky Chambers. Oh my gosh. That was so good. And There by Tommy Orange. I believe that was the group book for Indigathon that year. This was also the year that I discovered Uncanny Magazine, with a lot of just, I think I discovered it through Disabled People Destroy Science Fiction, and then kind of broke my experience open. I was excited to read more. Yeah, definitely this was the first year I did Indigathon. I read Hearts Unbroken, An American Sunrise by Joy Harjo, Trail of Lightning by Rebecca Roanhorse, The Birch Bark House by Louise Erdrich. Those were all good books. Ooh, this was when Ninth House came out. I remember standing in line waiting to get my copy of that signed. That was pretty cool. And you can see more disability lit here. The Pretty One by Kia Brown, Haben Girma's memoir, Reverse Flaneur. That one was really good too. Oh man, Genderqueer by Maya Kobabe. That was a life-changing read for me. This is when Devotions by Mary Oliver came out. I'm actually making my way through a reread. So this is starting to look a lot more, there's still like more fiction on this list than I've been reading now, but it's starting to look a lot more similar to what my reading tastes have evolved to. I am reading less literary fiction, I am reading less YA, and I am reading more memoirs and specifically seeking out diversity in like my science fiction and fantasy, particularly when it comes to non-white writers and to disability representation in those things. I'm reading a lot of what I really want to read this year, finally. I feel like this was the year that I kind of shook off a little bit of the last vestiges of reading for school and started reading for me again. Ooh, Girls Will Be Boys. That was a good one. I still think about that book. That was a queer nonfiction book. P. Jelly Clark I discovered that year. Wow, that was a good year for reading. I read a lot that year. Not everything was super memorable, but the ones that were really amazing. Okay, 2020, my challenge was to read 180 books, and I read 180. Here's where we get back into me beginning to read a lot more of poetry and graphic novels. One of the first books I have on here is Deaf Republic by Ilya Kaminsky. I have Bluets by Maggie Smith. Ooh, Watch Over Me by Nina LaCour. That was the big book of the year last year for me. I started rereading a lot of things too that I hadn't read since maybe college. I reread Catullus. I reread The Metamorphoses by Ovid. Disability Visibility came out that year. Oh, Something to Talk About by Meryl Wilsner was the first romance novel. It was a sapphic romance novel by a non-binary author. First thing of its kind I'd ever read. That was a big groundbreaker. All Boys Aren't Blue I read last year. I did surpass my goal that year of reading 30 books by Black authors because I realized, actually specifically thanks to Indigathon, that not just how painfully white the publishing industry is, but also how painfully white my own reading lists were. And I was like, I need to do something about that. Felix Ever After. That was so good. Oh, and The Stars No Blackness Between Them. Oh my goodness. If anyone was doing quarantine pages at that time, which I dearly loved and miss, that was a time when Janata Petrus came to talk to quarantine pages. Like, I so happy to just hear her speak. White Fragility and White Rage, I think a lot of people on BookTube read those books last year. Or maybe you haven't, I don't know. But yeah, especially when after George Floyd and Breonna Taylor were murdered by the police, and BookTube, like everywhere else, was having a big reckoning with racial inequality and police violence and all of this. Those were two big books that people buddy read, and I remember being like, this is the beginning. We don't stop with these. This was one of my least, the books that I read that had the least reviews on Goodreads was this book called Chinese Dance that was by one of my sister's professors. And I really, really liked it. It was a great sort of nonfiction book about dance and culture. Oh, I read The Raven Cycle. I didn't like The Raven Cycle as much as everyone seems to. I don't know if that was just me or what. Oh, This Is How You Lose the Time War. That was so good. Yeah, you definitely see here I've got a lot more books that are just kind of these shorter books, but much deeper dives into the interior lives of a very small group of characters. Nameless City. I read Becoming Eve by Abby Stein. Get a Life, Chloe Brown. Still to date, I think maybe only the second or third romance novel that I read with a protagonist who's disabled. And then this year, I have read 68 out of 100 books. According to Goodreads, that puts me behind schedule. I think that's a little bit of a silly way to think of it. Because, like I said, I mean, it's been really interesting to watch my reading tastes change. And as those tastes change, and as, I'm kind of going through life in the roaring 20s of the 21st century, it's been hard to just keep my mind on reading and keep my mind on books. Books used to really be my escape from the world and my stress relief, and in some ways they still are, but in many ways I've had to turn to other things because it's just taken a lot more brain power than I've really had to read. So as far as my tastes changing, I definitely think I'm reading a lot less YA. If anything, I thought I was going to be reading fewer graphic novels and comics. If anything, I'm reading massively more. I'm reading more poetry than I used to. I started reading memoirs and then started reading more nonfiction related to that, specifically nonfiction about people's lived experiences as opposed to, scientific nonfiction or works of history and things. And yeah, definitely the rise of romance was another big change there. So it's just kind of neat to see how I've progressed as a reader and how I've grown, what books I tend to return to read and reread again and again. So, I don't know, maybe you'll find this interesting, maybe you won't, but either way, if you made it all the way to the end of this video, thanks for sticking around. If you're new to the channel and you like what you see here, go ahead and subscribe because you'll get updated, whenever the YouTube algorithm decides to randomly update you. But I'll be here posting whenever I'm able to. And yeah, so also let me know if you do stuff like the Goodreads challenge, or if you set personal goals for yourself or things like that for reading. Tell me a little bit more about those, and have your goal setting things changed or adapted? Have your reading tastes changed or adapted over time either? I'm just really curious about this meta aspect of being readers and being readers on the internet. So as always, y'all, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.